So you may have seen these iceberg charts making their way around social media the past few years. They depict a subject, with more common knowledge about it at the top, and becoming increasingly more obscure as you progress down the iceberg. This one that I've made focuses on the living lycanthrope, the real-life werewolf, known as Dogman. Level 1 of the iceberg contains stuff most people that are even somewhat familiar with Dogman will still have heard of. First off are werewolves, which are, in all honesty, far better known than the Dogman is. We have stories of men that turn into wolves going as far back as before the birth of Jesus Christ, and in some cases it seems like at the very least, the people telling the stories believe them to be true. An overwhelming majority of Dogman eyewitnesses have described what they saw as resembling a Hollywood werewolf, although many believe that the Dogman creatures aren't shapeshifters, but rather flesh and blood animals that just have yet to be recognized by science. Next up is Dogman Encounters Radio. It's a YouTube channel run by a gentleman named Vic Cundiff, and it's far and away the biggest YouTube channel in the Dogman community. Although if you'd like to change that, my subscribe button is right there. The final level 1 entry is about the potential Dogman photos that have come out over the years. While there's nothing quite on the same level as, say, the Patty film, like there is for Bigfoot, these photographs are intriguing to say the least. There are many hoaxes floating around online, but the number of pictures that could be the real deal should be enough to keep anyone up at night. So first off on level 2, we have the 7 types of dogmen. As you can see here, by combing through the thousands of Dogman eyewitness reports, Dogman researchers have created 7 types of dogmen to categorize these creatures into. These 7 types get split up into 2 different groups, with them being differentiated by their legs. The first type, ironically called type 3s, have plantigrade legs like a human would, while the other type, K9s, have digigrade legs like a dog. While K9 types are closer to what you'd imagine when you think of a werewolf, the type 3s are said to be closer to primates with snouts, like a massively scaled up baboon. The type 3 name comes from the belief that there are 4 types of Bigfoot in North America, and these things are the third type, sometimes called googwies. It is a point of contention among some as to whether or not these entities should really be classified as dogmen. Interestingly enough, the second canine variant is said to resemble a hyena, even though, contrary to popular belief, hyenas are not actually canines. Next is the Beast of Bray Road. The Beast of Bray Road is likely the most famous individual dogman in the world, having been sighted on Bray Road in Elkhorn, Wisconsin for decades now. There are numerous reports of it acting aggressively, and even speaking once, saying something that sounded like Gadara. The final entry on level 2 is the Dogman's V-taper. Many Dogman eyewitnesses have reported these beasts having very clear V-tapers. The upside-down triangle torso, basically just huge shoulders and lats, and a very tiny waist. This type of physique isn't found in nature, and a V-taper as impressive as Dogman's isn't found outside of the men's classic at the Olympia, so the question remains, why do these things look the way that they do? First off on level 3 are non-corporeal dogmen. This is where we start to get more into what some people call the woo side of Dogman. Stuff that makes you ask if this creature is more than just an undiscovered apex predator. There are some eyewitnesses that have reported some pretty bizarre things about the Dogman. I think even the biggest animal lovers will be understanding of someone opening fire on these things. What happens next? Well, that depends on who you ask. Some stories say bullets can actually blast off chunks of their flesh and cause them to hit the road. Some people have reported them completely no-selling gunshots. A few have claimed to bag and tag the colossal canine. What's strangest is the significant number of stories claiming that bullets just pass right through the creature with them not even acknowledging that they've been shot at. Other eyewitnesses have claimed these things have just appeared inside of their homes. Not snuck in, not broken the door down, just appeared right in their homes. Now these stories should be approached with a healthy amount of skepticism, but the sheer number of them does raise some questions. Next up are Dogman hotspots. When it comes to Dogman sightings, not all places are created equal, and if you look at the right maps, you'll find that there are areas in places like Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, Michigan, Kentucky, etc., where the odds of running into one of these guys skyrockets. Keep that in mind the next time you plan a camping trip. Going off of that, the last entry on level 3 is the possibility of Dogman-related deaths. Now, this is a bit speculative, but Dogman researchers have theorized that some of the deaths that have been chalked up to unidentified canine or unidentified canines should really be attributed to the real-life werewolf. Now, it's more than a little difficult to talk to someone that's been taken out by a dogman, but although they're hard to come by, there are reports of them actually attacking people. If you look into the missing 411 phenomenon, the number of disappearances that have occurred in America's national parks, often under extremely bizarre circumstances, a number of people have suggested the possibility that some of these disappearances can be chalked up to some of the cryptids native to North America, Dogman included. Next up, we have level 4 of the Dogman Iceberg, and the first item is a strange detail that's been mentioned by a number of Dogman eyewitnesses, and that's the sound that these creatures make when switching from a quadrupedal stance to a bipedal one. It's said to be a popping noise, and sounds like someone cracking their joints. Now, this detail isn't mentioned by everyone that's unfortunate enough to run afoul these beasts, but it has been mentioned by enough people, independently of each other, to raise question. The next thing on this level are the cynocephali. The cynocephali were said to be men with dogs' heads. Now, unlike the Dogman, these entities were not werewolves. They were indistinguishable from humans from the neck down. They were also said to be able to use tools, wear clothing, and understand, although not produce, spoken language. What I find most interesting about these creatures is how often they appear in the historical text. In the 9th century, a monk wrote a letter speculating as to whether or not they have souls, and this letter was written as if these creatures were very real, and Alexander the Great even penned an epistle to Aristotle about his encounters with them while on his travels. The question is, well, where did the cynocephali go? The final entry on this level is about the Dogman's intelligence. If you look into enough eyewitness reports, you'll find evidence that these things are some pretty crafty canines. There are stories of them doing things like trying to use door handles for homes and vehicles, tapping on windows, then immediately disappearing to draw people outside, recognizing firearms, recognizing and avoiding trail cams, which might explain why we haven't captured more photographic evidence of them. And there's evidence that they seem to actively enjoy scaring humans, among other things. Now, it has been speculated as to why these creatures are so intelligent. Some people say it's because they're more paranormal in nature and are closer to humans than animals when it comes to brains. Some people point towards their disproportionately large heads when compared to dogs or wolves as signs of more brain power, etc. But regardless of the source of their mental capacity, I don't think the idea of these gigantic apex predators being impossibly big, strong, fast, and smart is helping anybody's sleeping habits. The first entry on level 5 is the first recorded Dogman sighting, which occurred in Wexford County, Michigan in 1887. The eyewitnesses were lumberjacks, and the creature they encountered is described as having been a 7-foot-tall beast with a wolf's head and a humanoid body with a howl that almost sounded like a person screaming. Some details, such as the number of lumberjacks and the eye color of the Dogman, vary from source to source. The next entry refers to the strange dreams that many eyewitnesses report after an encounter with the Dogman. A great number of people have reported seeing these things in their dreams, or nightmares, rather, constantly after encounters, even years later. The phenomenon seems to be unique to them in the cryptid world. You don't hear these kinds of stories from people that ran into Bigfoot. Like with some of the other entries on the iceberg, Dogman researchers seem to be split into two groups as far as explanations go. The people on the more woo side say it's evidence of the Dogman's supernatural nature, while people that lean more towards the natural animal explanation chalk it up to some type of PTSD from encountering these things. The final entry is definitely one of the stranger parts of the Dogman phenomenon, and it's a sentence that's been said by a surprising number of people that have encountered these things. It let me go. Just by eyeballing one of these things, you can tell that Dogman is pretty much the apex of apex predators. Over 7 feet tall, built like a bodybuilder, strong and fast as an animal can be with all the natural weapons that you can ask for. Not someone you want to run into during a late night walk in the woods. Now, it's not entirely known how aggressive towards humans these things are, but there are reports of them attacking people. Now, what's interesting is that almost everyone who's had a Dogman actively acknowledge their presence and act aggressively towards them have said that the reason for their survival is the same. It let me go. It's currently unknown as to why these colossal canines do this, but more than a few people have theorized that while the Dogman is territorial, They know that if people start going missing, they will attract more attention from people with guns. Regardless of why they let us go, I, for one, would like to take a moment to thank the Dogman community for their magnanimity. Kicking off level 6 is the 1987 radio song that brought the Dogman much of his fame. The song, called The Legend, was created by Michigan disc jockey Steve Cook as an April Fool's Day joke, with many of the reports mentioned in the song being Cook's own invention. What's interesting is that after the song was released, Cook became inundated with reports of Dogman encounters from people in the area, and the song is what gave the Dogman his association with the Wolverine state and the nickname of the Michigan Dogman. The next entry is a weird pattern that's shown up in a few Dogman sightings over the decades, and that's them wearing clothing. Now, this isn't a commonly reported trait by any means, but it has been mentioned often enough to raise some questions. Now, these stories don't paint them as trendsetters by any means. We're talking shirts or pants, and reports of them wearing both are even rarer. There are some reports of flannel shirt wearing Bigfoot back in the 1960s and 1970s, so there is some precedent for cryptids that like to leave a little bit to the imagination. As far as how Dogman got these clothes, that's anyone's guess, but I don't imagine they shop at Target. Closing out level 6 is the theory that, contrary to his name, Dogman isn't actually a canine. Although they are said to look like they have the head of some kind of dog or wolf, there aren't any known dogs or wolves that have hands. This does raise the possibility that these creatures are more closely related to some other type of snouted animal, and they have been misidentified all this time. Like mentioned earlier, there are reports of hyena-looking dogmen, even though hyenas are not canines. The top suspects as to what we're actually dealing with here are Baboon Man, Raccoon Man, and Lemur Man. Some of the Type 3 dogmen are said to resemble baboons. Raccoons do have hands, and there were giant lemurs, some of which weighed over 300 pounds, that went extinct fairly recently in the grand scheme of things. Given the shock and terror that eyewitnesses undergo when seeing these things, it's very possible that while trying to process what's in front of them, their brains default to saying werewolf, as they would have some context for seeing those things in fictional works, such as television and movies. Starting off level 7 are the stories of Dogman and the Men in Black. There are numerous reports from eyewitnesses claiming that after their Dogman encounter, or after they tried to go to the media about their encounter, or after they tried to publish evidence that they had captured, they suddenly got visits from members of government agencies we don't know the names of. There are similar stories with other types of unexplained phenomena, Bigfoot, UFOs, etc. But I think these reports of government agencies tasked with covering up Dogman stories should be held up to a good degree of scrutiny. The next entry is the Beast of LBL. Like the Beast of Bray Road, the Beast of LBL is a regional dogman that's said to reside in land between the lakes Kentucky. What gives the beast such a low spot on the iceberg is that, depending on who you ask, it might have a body count. Story goes that back in the 1980s, the inside of a mobile home was found covered in blood and claw marks, with a family of 4 having been slain. Now, it's alleged that the incident was covered up to protect the tourism industry in the area. The story of the beasts of LBL's rampage has been floating around for decades, and I would like to make very clear that there is no hard evidence of this in terms of police reports or obituaries for the supposed victims. I also think that it does sound a little bit too much like a horror movie plot to be something I could fully buy into as a cryptid encounter. But, from what I've heard, if you talk to locals in the area that lived there during the time of the attack, well, you'll definitely find some true believers. The final entry on level 7 is the connection between Dogman and portals that is said to exist by some. Now, I've mentioned the more woo camp of Dogman believers a few times, but this is pretty deep into their territory. There really are reports out there claiming that these things come in and out of portals, with no one other than the Dogmen knowing where they lead. Some have even claimed that this is evidence that they're interdimensional in some way, which could potentially explain why we haven't been able to capture a specimen just yet. I wouldn't say I necessarily believe these stories, but the sheer number that have come out over the years from people all over the world, completely independently of each other, would indicate that some people are seeing something. At level 8 is what I think the really obvious fact that doesn't get acknowledged, and that's that bears are just misidentified dogmen. I mean, think about it. There have been stories of these creatures called bears, going back for thousands of years, but we have to acknowledge what's really going on. Giant, sometimes quadrupedal, sometimes bipedal, hairy animals with claws and a snout. Dogman. These tales of bears really being out there somewhere in the forests of North America, well, they make for great campfire stories, but ultimately they're just that. Stories.